you often don't know which SKU is going to work on retention, which SKU is going to work on acquisition. It's usually like one or two net new ideas or concepts that meaningfully change the business.
95% of the time in my experience, it's sales channel expansion that's going to make it happen. They think that launching new products is going to increase LTV. I've never seen that work.
With the right offer testing, the right strategy on the back end, you can make a meaningful difference, and it can be the unlock.
You have to look at your ecom business this way. Dylan, we have made it to episode 52. That is 1 year of Ecom Scaling Show episodes. Can you believe it?
It's a lot of YouTube thumbnails made, a lot of conversations had. I've learned a lot more about finance in the last year, Jon. I don't quite feel like I've earned the finance hat, hence why I'm not wearing it. But I feel like I've learned a thing or two. It's been a great time.
Yeah, man, and I can't wait for what we're going to talk about today. We're gonna talk about, are you stuck and can't scale? Here's the step-by-step guide. Bam. Okay, so this was a topic that you brought up. What was the big reason why you wanted to talk about this?
At Aplo, we so often work with brands in this like $5 to $50 million range. And oftentimes there's a few kind of key moments in that process where brands tend to get stuck. And there's like a lot of repeatable behaviors that we've seen brands do that allows them to keep going. And then there's some that we see them do that tends to make them stall or shrink. And I just feel like we got a good perspective on it, and hopefully can provide some value in terms of some things to look out for and maybe some things to focus on.
I love it. I have a few things that I'm thinking about here too, but before we get into the finance side or like my perspective, just explain really quick maybe the most common scenario when you find a brand that's stuck.
Everything at the end of the day sort of comes down to CAC to LTV. So even if you're not a high LTV brand, technically speaking, CAC to day one order is in some way CAC to value. It's just CAC to day one value. And then you have less 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 month LTV. But at the end of the day, because CAC tends to go up, almost every brand eventually hits a point with a funnel where they're looking at CAC to LTV and they basically say, I cannot spend another dollar. And then just to maintain that level of volume, you normally have to make some improvements because generally speaking, year over year, CPMs, the cost of advertising goes up. It's almost like inflation. And as a byproduct of that, just to hold baseline, you have to improve some degree. It varies by brand and category. So at a certain point, most brands get to that place. And ideally, you kind of see it coming before it happens and you kind of figure out the fix. But when you get there, the actions you take are so critical to not go backwards.
I feel like I sound like a broken record with what I'm going to say. Maybe it's because I was recording some free to grow CFO podcast about this, like videos about this right before we got on. But I think a lot of it comes down to knowing what marketing game you're playing, right? And the marketing game framework you and I always talk about, which again, we'll dive into this a little bit more, but it really is a framework for based on the LTV that your game has, right? What are the options from a contribution margin management against scaling ad spend perspective? And what are some of the tactics that can help alleviate the CAC to LTV equation getting locked up and you're stuck, right? So, well, I guess really quick, just as a reminder for everyone, because you may have not like listened to all of the Ecom Scaling Show episodes, but there's numerous marketing games, but in the D2C world, there's really just a few that come up the most often. High LTV, new customer dominant, apparel, high SKU count, closely related to apparel, but you can be a high SKU count game and not be apparel. All of those have different CAC to LTV, structures, and thus there are certain scaling constraints. I'll call it constraint because you kind of like get stuck in a constraint at some point. You're like, damn, how do I get out of this, right? That's really what we're talking about. They'll have different scaling constraints. And so there's different things you might have to consider if you're stuck and want to get out of it. So is there by any chance, Dylan, like a scenario, maybe it's one of the games where you see brands get stuck the most frequently?
I'd say that the most frequent major issue is first-time customer dominant brands with limited SKUs, because oftentimes those brands haven't developed the muscle of net new product expansion. And as a byproduct of that, that is the solution. And if you're not addressing it until the problem exists, you're late to the game to fixing the problem, because it might take you 10 new product ideas to find the next product that works. Because oftentimes net new product expansion is like the way. Sometimes it's channel expansion, but again, that also takes time. I'd say that game, if you have low LTV and like one core offer, you have to be thinking a lot more than some of the other games about product expansion as well as market or channel expansion. I would think a little bit less so about ad channel expansion, but at some point that's like later on the list. The clothing and apparel game or high SKU count game, that business model kind of lends itself structurally to being less likely to have this problem, because new launches are kind of like built into the business plan more often by default. But I'd say that you often don't know which SKU is going to work on retention, which SKU is going to work on acquisition. And at the end of the day, you need acquisition SKUs to fuel growth. So sometimes it just comes down to them learning how to basically do even more volume and or order sizing on the net new stuff, especially with clothing and apparel when there's like seasonality involved. Like if you launch a winter jacket and it crushes, but your lead times are 90 days or something, you have to wait essentially until the next cold season to really get leverage out of that. So I think that category less commonly has major issues, but it's still a skill to kind of think about how you kind of manage that risk when you kind of get stuck. The high LTV businesses, I think the most common mistake we see is the following. Oftentimes they've optimized spend so much that they forget that they're in the LTV game. So to put it this way, if you think about the average lifetime value over time, let's say your first order AOV is $50 and your 12-month LTV is $250. If you improve that first the first $50 of AOV by making AOV go up or making CAC go down, you're making a marginal difference, because the bulk of the value is created in the $200 thereafter that is returning customers. When that occurs, the leverage is actually mainly in improving LTV further. So for these businesses, time and time again, what we basically come in and work on is one metric: first order, subscribe and save take rates. So if you're already at like 50, 60, 70%, you're in a consumable business selling beverages, supplements, something of that nature, food. If you're in that 50 to 70% range of subscribe and save take rate, there's a good chance you've optimized your funnel fairly well. But if you're not, if you're at like 10%, you're probably able to get more squeeze, more growth just by improving sub and save take rate. So those are some thoughts that come to mind about like the different games and like the risks you have to think about while navigating them. But as like an operational principle, I would say the following as well. Regardless of the game you're playing, you have to make sure when you have this issue that you're trying to fix it with conviction, going after the highest leverage opportunity you have. And identifying what the highest leverage opportunity you have does require some experience or expertise. And that's why it's important to have people on your team who have seen these issues before across a variety of categories. Because the single biggest mistake we most commonly see with brands in the mid 7 figures to low 8 figures is this issue arises and they basically try to do everything. Like just like throw darts at the wall, if you will, trying to make different things work. And like the worst version of this is you hire a ton of new people to try to do all these new things, to make all these bets. And more often than not, it actually takes discipline to remain focused on what you believe strongly to be the one or two things that are actually going to get the business to a healthier spot. Ideally, when you're looking at CAC to LTV and CAC gradually getting higher, you're having the foresight to know this can't go on forever, and you're already actively trying to address the issue with some other opportunities. But if you're already at the place where CAC is capped, you're stuck. You have to be very, very disciplined about not doing too much and actually focusing on like, what can I actually do to make a meaningful difference? Because it's almost never doing 10 things at once, making 10 things incrementally better. It's usually like one or two net new ideas or concepts that meaningfully change the business. And again, it's scary because it takes conviction. I think that like it's nice to feel mentally diversified where you have all these bets and one of them are going to pay off. But sometimes it takes conviction going after the one or two things that most meaningfully matter. So an example would be, I'm going to take this one metric, sub and save take rate, and I'm going to get it up in relation to my CAC to LTV. So you want to make sure that metric goes up while your CAC stays healthy. For a one-time purchase dominant brand, it's probably one of two things: more new products and or sales channel expansion into Amazon, retail, so on and so forth. It's almost never try every single ad channel ever and try to get a better ROAS there. Like that is rarely the path forward. So the key word to me is conviction and making sure you're placing your bets accordingly based off of the game you're playing. That is my long-winded answer.
No, well, I want to say a couple of things on top of that, which is this whole concept of like, what marketing game are you playing? The whole reason why we've coined that term is because there's actually more of a tried and true, straightforward playbook than people realize. And I didn't used to realize it. And I want to be clear. It doesn't mean that this framework that we talk about a lot of times on this show is 100% complete for every single brand. It isn't. But it is a roadmap that, like, if you follow it, 80-20 rule, it's going to lead you largely in the right direction, and unless something fundamentally shifts on how you grow a digitally native consumer goods brand. We're not making it up to sound smart. A lot of these rules and the playbooks, it's just seeing hundreds of brands, like what worked, what didn't, and then going conceptually like, oh shoot, that's what happened. And like, you can't do that when you're playing this game. So like, there's a couple very strong convictions I have that are, we've even kind of written this out in a manual for our CFOs at Free to Grow CFO, like follow the growth marketing game playbook roadmap, because it's just the way it works. And like, one of those things that I have a strong conviction about is that, generally speaking, when you're scaling a new customer dominant brand, if you can choose just one high leverage thing to do to not get stuck as you scale, it's expand sales channels. I'll say that above new product development any day. Does it mean that new product development isn't worth your time? No, it doesn't mean that. But more often than not, 95% of the time in my experience, it's sales channel expansion that's going to make it happen. Now, I don't want to say, I want to be clear about something. When it comes to launching new products, this is I think the important thing where I see founders get tripped up. They think that launching new products is going to increase LTV meaningfully to the point where they're no longer a new customer dominant brand. I've never seen that work. If you figure it out, cool. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try it if you swear you're going to figure it out, but it's not about that. It's about expanding your reach of reaching more new customers, right? And so you're not changing the game you're playing. You're enhancing the game you're playing through launching new products and launching new sales channels.
One quick call out on the channel expansion piece, because I totally agree, especially if you already have a lot of momentum. The mistake we then most commonly see then is measurement of media spend against a singular channel.
Totally.
If you're D2C first and you expand to Amazon and then eventually retail, you have to take into account the effect of that spend in those channels, because not every single dollar spent in those channels will be 100% incremental, meaning some of them may have occurred anyways on your core D2C business. So it's most easy to measure across Amazon, but it's never perfect. That's the beauty of attribution. But at a certain point, you have to start measuring your entire media spend against all your revenue. So just making that call out, because we've also seen brands basically come to us and be like, our ROAS dropped by 30%. And Oh, when did it drop by 30%? Oh, it started gradually dropping like the week you launched Amazon. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like
Yeah.
if the net pie is increasing greater than your CAC is going, or ROAS is dropping, like that's actually probably a good thing. But it's not a good thing if you don't take into account those metrics and then in turn don't grow properly. So
Totally.
just something to be mindful of as well.
100%. We've actually been, the Shopify plus Amazon scenario comes up all the time for us in the CFO world with, honestly, high LTV brands and new customer dominant brands and apparel brands. We've started using a tool called Expandify to marry up a combined cohort model effectively across the multiple e-commerce channels. And what we've actually found by doing that is like, keep spending on Meta, even though it looks like all of a sudden D2C is like less profitable or unprofitable. And we've actually helped a couple multi-channel e-commerce brands like scale to 50 plus million, when if you had just assumed that all the Meta spend should be applied to the D2C or Shopify channel, you would have thought that this is unprofitable spend, but these guys are printing money, right? And by the way, I don't want to claim that Expandify has perfect attribution. That's not what it's about. It has other ways to look at attribution, right? And from a CFO perspective, we can give some confidence to whether or not your spend is correlating with, ultimately, we'll call it global contribution margin dollar expansion, right? That's what it really matters. There's another thing I wanted to mention that I thought of as you were talking about, that in reality here with getting stuck, right? Like our unit economics getting stuck on the next incremental dollar, the incrementality of the next dollar spend, basically, right? Yeah. Is that what I've realized? We've been sort of formalizing the growth marketing game playbook within our CFO team, talking conceptually about like, how are we doing this with our clients? What are some other examples that like I haven't thought of that you've thought of? And one thing that I've learned in just the last couple weeks, I've known this, but I've like actually been able to like put words to it. The apparel game is a high LTV game. It's just not fast enough. It just doesn't come fast enough like it does in the subscription or high LTV game, right? Where you guys use the term at Aplo Group, LTV velocity, right? That like with a subscription product or a consumable product, the velocity of accumulating LTV month over month happens fast enough that we can lose more, right, on acquiring a new customer. The thing to think about with apparel, and maybe even the high SKU count game outside of apparel, is you really got to dig into your longer range cohort model, right? Beyond 12 months. And more importantly, it's helpful for us on the CFO side to just look at combined, like total global returning customer sales versus new customer sales, right? We have a mutual client that's an apparel brand that they have high LTV. It just doesn't come fast enough to lose a ton of money this month on customer acquisition. And so I think it's important to go like, what we call the high LTV game, it's really the high fast LTV game, right? And the new customer dominant game is basically just the low LTV game. Doesn't matter what time horizon you pull, relatively speaking, there's low to no LTV. And so like this stuff is important. Like if you're not looking at this, once you see this, you can't unsee it. It's like impossible to unsee it. And you realize that what like forecasting and like more elite financial and even operations planning is built around in an e-com business, it's customer behavior. And the crux of customer behavior is what does new customer sales look like versus returning customer sales? And how do those two things change as we spend more or less on ad dollars and as we launch more products and as we get into new sales channels? That's really the conceptual foundation of all of this. And it is essential. It's mandatory. It's not optional. You have to look at your e-com business this way.
I think that the omnichannel piece is integral over time. I think the double click in the high LTV game too. I think that because a lot of the we can kind of go down the list, but a lot of the initial kind of big ecom brands were not necessarily always high LTV brands. And it'd be interesting to think about like what percentage of the ecom industry is playing the high LTV game. Probably some tools we could go through to try to come up with a guesstimate on that. But I think so much of the traditional best practices or recommendations are built around brands that are not playing the high LTV game. And like, I'll make a statement of like, hey, like maybe if you've done really little work on retention over all time, you can try to improve your 12-month LTV by 30%. Completely arbitrary number, but let's just assume that it's like a viable target for the sake of example. If your LTV already increases by between order 1 and your and month 12 by say $200 as an example, a 30% swing is huge. If it increases by $20, you're not going to do much. And I think that no matter what you believe to be possible, if you're that high LTV business, the pure dollar leverage that exists in optimizing those your retention curves is just so great that it's an under talked about opportunity. People talk about email, people talk about this, that, the other thing. Like I love just sitting looking at the cohorts and seeing them going up. I think that oftentimes this is like an underappreciated discipline in the ecom space. How do you strategize your subscription programs? How do you reduce churn? How do you improve order one sub and save take rates? Like I've seen businesses in like I agree with you, Jon. You gave the example of like it's really hard to launch new products that meaningfully improve LTV. I agree, but I've seen businesses that already have good LTV change their business just by making it even better. So I think if you are in one of those categories, if you're spending all your time thinking about ads, which a lot of D2C brand founders in the one-time purchase game have to spend a lot more time on, it may actually be worth shifting some of your focus as a founder on resources and energy to the LTV piece of the business, because with the right offer testing, the right strategy on the back end, you can make a meaningful difference to your cohort retention rate over time, and it can be the unlock. So just want to kind of put emphasis on that for those high LTV brands that feel stuck.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy. Like, I gotta be honest, like, we developed this whole concept of like games by just talking for the last year. This is week 52, right? And it's really made me realize, and maybe these are my final thoughts. Maybe I'm landing the plane on my end right here at this, but like I used to think when I first got into ecom, whenever that was, 12, 13, 14 years ago, this whole concept of testing is like so pervasive in our world. And it's like you can test your way to success. Don't you feel like that? Like it's a common, just test ad nauseam. And it's almost like, actually, no, it's like sifting for gold, right? And like you just do it forever, and eventually there's like a massive nugget and your business has changed forever. Testing is important, but I think that's a lie. And that actually scaling an ecom brand profitably and not getting stuck is knowing which game you're playing and playing to the strengths of that game, not trying to enhance the weaknesses of that game, right?
Yeah.
Play into the strengths. Those are the high leverage opportunities, right? Not try to cover for the weaknesses. That involves actually going and try to play a different game. And then you're not just kind of blindly panning for gold. You're actually deploying a playbook that economically has compounding capabilities, right? Compounding profit and cash flow and return on invested capital. And so that's what this is all about. That should be your takeaway, in my opinion, from a finance perspective. How about you, Dylan?
Yeah, ultimately, no matter the game you're playing, you're trying to build a durable compounding machine, and you want to go and take the path that increases durability and the odds of compounding. So I would just say that you have to have conviction in what you're trying to do when you are stuck, because especially if you have an organization with many, many people, like if you're changing your strategy every week, it's just like chaos, and oftentimes nothing moves forward. You have to be very, very aware of the game you're playing and just go towards those few levers that exist in each of those games to make a difference. And I think in all the games, it's possible to make a great, durable business. It's just about, again, taking the steps that make the most sense for that game.
All right, man. That's a wrap. Episode 52 in the books. Ready for the next one. Let's go.
Next year, here we come.
Exactly. Year 2. Boom.